In other words, the rabbis say, we understand in life that there is darkness. And in some ways, darkness is self evident. It's so easy to fall into a quagmire of darkness, but to focus on light, despite darkness, despite difficulties, despite loss, that's the Jewish thing. That's the Jewish way. And so, even in the presence of this great darkness, the darkness of the 6 million, we light candles because despite the loss, we still retain hope that the world can be brighter today and, God willing, tomorrow. The first candle is lit in memory of 1 million mothers and fathers who died as martyrs. Cantor Goldman will light the second candle.
The second candle is lit in memory of 1.5 million innocent children who fell brutally at the hands of the enemy. Rabbi
The third candle is lit in memory of the Bubbies and the Zadies and all our unknown dead relatives, all of whom, in their own way, resisted with dignity.
The fourth candle is lit in memory of the partisan bands who fought for freedom, yours and ours. The fifth candle is lit in memory of the righteous persons, known and unknown, to whom each of us owes our very survival.
Let us light the sixth candle for the future. The hate and murder may be blotted out, that humans may live in freedom, and that we may never forget our martyrs.
Continue with the Shoah Memorial Prayer, first in English, led by Cantor Cooper.
Creator of all, source and shelter, grant a perfect rest under your tabernacle of peace to those who perished in the Holocaust, our fathers and mothers, our sisters and brothers, our rabbis and teachers, our neighbors and children, the named and the unnamed, whose lives were cut off by brutal, vicious, cunning, and calculated violence.
May they find peace in the world to come. Remember the survivors who have since passed away and the virtues of our people who've died at the hands of malice in every generation. We remember the works of their hands and the messages of their hearts. Bless the defenders of Israel with safety and strength, and the righteous of all nations who provide protection, shelter, and comfort to the Jewish people.
Let their deeds be the source of favor in heaven and healing on earth. Put an end to anger, hatred, and fear, and lead us to a time when no one will suffer at the hand of another. Speedily in ours, may the memories of all who faced these horrors be sanctified with joy and love. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life, a living blessing in our midst. And now I invite Cantor Goldman to share the words of El Maleh Rachamim.
Actually, before we do that, I just wanted to jump in, as that connection is so clear, the bond of everlasting life. And wanted to just put out a request that if you happen to be here and you're logged in on more than one device, if you would mind logging out, we want to make sure that people are able to join us. So if you have more than one device and wouldn't mind logging out, that would be great. Otherwise, I believe we are streaming to social media, right, Rabbi Kale? Oh, no, we're not. Okay, so that's okay. We're recording it and people will have access to it later. So that's fantastic. But thank you to those who are able to do that. So I appreciate it. But from the mundane to the sacred, Cantor Goldman.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קרשים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מסירים, את נשמת יקירינו שהלכו לעולמם. בעל הרחמים יסירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו שלום על משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
Amen. Fully compassionate God, Most High, to our loved ones who have entered eternity, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy forever, enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. They will rest in peace. And we say, Amen. We are going to continue this part of our evening together, our ritual, with Kaddish Yatom. Kaddish Yatom is, of course, an opportunity for us to remember, and we do that, and we give thanks for the blessing of life, even life cut short. We give thanks for what we had. But Kaddish Yatom is the mourner's Kaddish, and it also, by definition, is an opportunity for us to support the mourners in our midst. And tonight, on Yom Hashoah, we change that a bit because we are all mourners. Tonight, we are all mourners as part of the Jewish people. We are all mourners, and we are all here to give thanks for the blessing of life, even life cut short. And so we say, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. The memory of the righteous ones is always a blessing, today, tomorrow, and always. Together we give thanks for their lives, for the blessings of their lives with those words, Kaddish Yatom. If it is your custom to rise, I invite you to do so. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. Be'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam olmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yapa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal. Shemei dekudisha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechemata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all of us as a people who mourn, and comfort to us as we are bereaved, as we mark this day of mourning and of memory and of meaning. Amen.
Amen. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. Yesh kochavim sheoram magia arza, rak kaasher hem atzmam avdu veinam. Yesh anashim sheziv zichram meir, kaasher hem atzmam einam od betufeinu. Od eile hamavikim becheshkat halayil, hem shemarim la'adam et haderech, et haderech. Hem shemarim la'adam et haderech, et haderech. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. Et haderech. We remember.
thank you to all of our clergy partners, our rabbis and cantors, for putting together this very important memorial and ceremony for all of us tonight. In one of the darkest moments in modern civilization, over 6 million Jews were killed by Nazi Germany in a state-sponsored genocide. The Holocaust killed over 2/3 of Europe's entire Jewish population, and the Nazis, in their single-minded belief of German racial superiority, targeted any group they felt that were racially or ideologically inferior, including, of course, the Jews and Roma people, the disabled, some of the Slavic peoples, socialists, communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and more. For decades after the end of World War II, the Holocaust conjured up horrifying images and memories. Names like Auschwitz and Dachau were stinging reminders of a genocide that sought to eliminate the Jewish people in Europe. Never again was both a reminder of the horrors of the Holocaust and an admonition to never again allow such hatred to take root. But now, more than 75 years after the end of the war, memories of the Holocaust are fading. A recent study found that nearly 2/3 of Americans between the ages of 18 and 40 did not know the scope of the Holocaust, and only half could name a single concentration camp or ghetto. More than 1/3 of people polled thought that fewer than 2 million Jews were killed. And more than half did not even know about Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi concentration camp where more than 1 million men, women, and children were murdered. Every year, we pause on Yom Hashoah to remember. We remember the lives that were lost. We remember the scope of the tragedy. But we also remember those that survived had their lives forever changed and altered. For the last decades, we have turned to the survivors of the Holocaust to teach us not only about what they witnessed, and that would be enough, but also to teach us how they moved past what they witnessed and what they experienced, what they did with the rest of our lives, and how we can use their experiences not only to remember and not only to make never again still a byword for the international community, but also to learn how to turn the mourning into meaning, now and in the future. It is my honor to introduce our panelists this evening. Steve Kvari is a survivor of the Holocaust. Born in Hungary, had an incredible experience. I don't want to take too much away. I'd like to let him introduce himself. Had an incredible experience with his family. This is very moving for me. Had an incredible experience with his family. Owes a lot of credit to a righteous Gentile who risked his life on many occasions to save not just Steve, but many, many other people. I'm going to let Steve introduce himself more thoroughly.
My name is Steve Kaveri. I was born in 1941. And I'm sorry, I also get emotional whenever I give my talks. Usually I lose it a little later than earlier, but given some of the talks ahead of me, I'm in the mood, so to speak. I was a happy little camper until I was about 3.5 years old, and all of a sudden I lost my dad. It turned out to be forced labor. And then when I was about 3.5, or thereabouts, this was about August of 1944, I found myself in a strange environment in Budapest, in Király Street. My parents dropped me off at this strange house with yellow brick entrance in the vestibule. And all I can remember as a kid is I was assigned to a girl, a lady, a teenager named, and I hope you don't going to laugh, it's Little Red Riding Hood. Piroshka is the actual name in Hungarian, which is a very fairly common name. It's just the translation is kind of funny. And she took care of me. And then eventually I reunited with my parents about 4 or 5 months later. And I have never been able to reconnect with Piroshka, and to this day, that's avoiding my life. The place where I was, what I remember besides the yellow brick is the white flag with a red cross, which was the flag of the Swiss Red Cross. And it was because of the Swiss, and not the least, in fact, they were just cogs in the machinery of righteous Gentiles who at great sacrifice attempted and in large measure succeeded by rooks and crooks to save as many Jewish lives as possible. I will have to say that out of the surviving Hungarian Jews, if you meet one, their chances are very good. In fact, it's almost impossible to imagine that anyone would have survived were it not for the righteousness of the Swedish diplomat and the Swiss diplomat. The Swedish diplomat in particular, he was the quarterback of this affair. Raoul Wallenberg, he was placed in Budapest by the World Jewish Congress and the War Refugee Board. Raoul Wallenberg comes from is a scion of the Wallenberg family. Was educated in the United States at the University of Michigan, received a degree in architecture, and served in various capacities throughout the world at the Swedish diplomatic corps. He first became acquainted of the plight of the Jewish people when he was stationed in Haifa in Israel, well, Palestine at that time. He was eventually enlisted by Kalman Lauer, an industrialist who was the point man of the World Jewish Congress and the War Refugee Board in Stockholm to arrange for the rescue of the remaining Jewish population. At that time was about 200,000, about 500,000 Hungarian Jews have already been put on the transports and met their ultimate demise in Auschwitz, Birkenau, Sobibor, etc. The means by which they succeeded in large measure was through setting up safe houses for Jews, and I was in the children's safe house in Király Street in Budapest, and also in large measure in the glass house next door to the Swedish embassy. An industry was undertaken in forging diplomatic passports and Schutzpasses, which are safe passage documents, which were distributed to the recipients, and they were put up in these apartment buildings. Just the Swiss alone, I believe, were responsible for 76 buildings that they purchased And then the Swedish, I don't know how many, but at least that many, that were housing the refugees. And the Nazis had to, they could not afford to invade these premises, although there had been incidents of invasions, but by and large, the people in these refuges survived, thanks to these righteous gentlemen. The only thing I like to say in addition is that Raoul Wallenberg, he arrived on July the 9th, 1944, and then he met his demise sometime in March, or I'm sorry, in Moscow in somewhere in 1947 or 48, ostensibly from a fatal heart attack. But what really happened was on February the 17th, 1945, he was commandeered by Marshal Zhukov to go to Debrecen, to the second largest city in Hungary, to meet with the Russians, military leadership, the Army Corps, the Red Army Corps. When he arrived in Debrecen, he was arrested and eventually sent to Ljubljana prison in Moscow, where he met his end. It is not clear why he died. It is probable that it was in response to the refusal of the Swedes and the Wallenberg family to give in to blackmail to Joseph Stalin, who demanded a ransom, which they refused, and that could have been the reason for his demise. Like I said in conclusion, it would be hard to find a Hungarian survivor who does not owe his life to the effort undertaken, by and large, quarterbacked by Raoul Wallenberg, and in large measure, Karl Lotz. I myself owe my life to Karl Lotz. And, that's basically the story.
Thank you, Steve. We'll actually be back with questions for the whole panel in just a little bit. I'd also like to introduce George Meyer, who was born in Poland and came to the United States with his family after the war in 1947, and didn't find out until later exactly what happened in those intervening years. So George, please introduce yourself and share your story a little more fully.
Good evening. My name is George Mayer, and I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust. I was born on January 30th, 1940, in the city of Lvov, 4 months after the war began, and was already occupied by the Soviet Union. After the war, my parents and I came to the United States in 1947. Like most survivors, my parents never talked to me about the war. I only learned bits and pieces at the kitchen table when they were with friends who had had similar experiences, and I would be listening from another room. I first learned about my early life in Poland when a letter arrived to my father about a year after he had passed away from the Chervinskys. That was the beginning of my correspondence that lasted for years. I learned that Danka and Vyacheslav kept me in their apartment from the age of 2 to 4.5. They risked their lives and those of their family who lived with them by hiding me. Many years after that first letter, Barbara and I decided to go to Poland, meet with the Chervinskys, and try to piece together those early years of my life. I asked my cousin Ziggy, who was 18 years older than me and lived in New York, and his wife Helen to join us on our trip, since his family was also from Lvov and Helen from Krakow. Throughout our trip, their personal experiences during the war mesmerized us and enriched our knowledge of what was taking place in Poland and helped me piece together some aspects of my story. I learned that 3 families kept me. The first family was in Lvov, but when Germany occupied Lvov, my parents were able to get false papers and left for Warsaw. In Warsaw, my mother brought me to the Chervinskys, who kept me from the age of 2 to 4.5, while my parents were hidden in different parts of the city. The third family was initially in Warsaw, but left for Zakopane when their neighborhood was bombed. I never learned who the first and third families were. After the war, my parents survived and picked me up in Zakopane, and we were smuggled into the western sector of Vienna, where we stayed until we came to the United States. 2 of the most memorable aspects of the trip were our visit to Lvov and seeing the home Ziggy and my family lived in from the time I was born until we left Lvov. When Barbara and I arranged, the second was when we arranged a meeting with Duncan Vyacheslav at our hotel for dinner. I was never more nervous in my life than waiting to meet the family that kept me during those formative years. I put together a list of over 100 questions to ask them, and after dinner, we ended up talking in our hotel room until 2 in the morning. In the morning, the next day, we went to visit them at their apartment, and they overwhelmed us with their kindness and surprised us with many photos taken when we lived together. Those are the only photos I have from that period of my life.
Thank you, George. And again, we'll be back in a little while with questions for the entire panel. And last, but definitely not least, I'd like to introduce my friend Gladys Rubin, who was born in Poland. When the war broke out, escaped to Russia and then to Uzbekistan, and then to Bolivia, and then eventually made her way here to the United States. Gladys.
Gladys, can you unmute?
When I was 4, the war broke out in Poland in 1939, and the Germans threw bombs into our town. It was a beautiful small city, and many Jews lived there in peace, in harmony, and I was a very happy child. And then when the Germans came, they were looking how to get all the goods, all the money from them. And so their first thing that they did is take the Jews out into a marketplace and got a hold of the cantor who had a beard and were threatening to burn his beard and kill some people unless they brought the money and whatever valuable belongings. And so anyway, at that time, my father had a barber shop, and in the barber, as a barber, he was very popular because the Germans had to come and get their haircut and all. But nevertheless, they took him out a couple of times and threatened him. So my mother told him that she wanted him to go escape to Russia and save himself because she didn't know how they're gonna take care of what they're gonna do to the women and children. So my father at the time said, you know, that Russia is a big country, and if I go, we don't know if we ever gonna see each other. So I'd like for all of us to go. Of course, they didn't have the money, so they sold some furniture and took whatever they could. And they paid a man who had a buggy and horse. And they got together with the cousins of my father, and that's how we escaped to Russia. It was at night, it was scary, and we had problems to begin with when the bombs fell at first. Our apartment was burning, and my mother got myself and my sister, who was 3.5 years older, on the first floor and outside, and threw out whatever she could through the window to save photos and, like blankets and things like that. And it was a very, very difficult and scary journey to Russia. But we got to Russia, and my mother was pregnant with her third child. She was 6 months pregnant. My sister was 3.5 years older, so she was like 7.5. And we ended up in Yaroslav, which was a lovely town, and the people there were very nice. They gave my father a job, my mother a job, and they took my sister and I in to the school, a nursery school, or it was kindergarten at the time. And we lived there for maybe a year and a half. And when Germans came in close to Moscow, the Russian people said, well, we don't know what's going to happen to us. And since you are Jewish people, we feel you should go to Uzbek Asia. So we ran further. We were running to Asia by train. It took about 3 days to get on a train. In the meantime, my father went out from the station outside. And when I followed him. He didn't know that I did. And when he came back, my mother said, where is Gitale? And they said, and he says, I don't know. She said, she followed you. So they started looking for me, and it took them many hours. They almost left without me. It was the whole experience going to Russia and living there and going to Uzbekistan and not having food. And sometimes my father was not with us because they took him out to a service area so that he would work for the Russians that time. He was not a soldier, but they needed the barber. And we never got any help, and my mother got sick, and it was a lot of problems. We little girls, there were 3 of us by then, were left behind alone, and nobody took care of us. We had to take care of each other. And my mother was gone. She got sick. Nobody knew where she was. They thought she was dead. Anyway, to make a long story short, the war ended. We got back to Poland, and when we did get back, we found out that the Polacks were still having pogroms. They didn't want the Jews to take over the homes, take back the homes and so forth. So they were killing the one, but Germany didn't finish. They were trying to finish. So we escaped to a DP camp with the help of the Haganah, who had come to Poland after the war to help whoever needed help, guiding them. And so we ended up in Germany again, escaping from Poland to Germany. And we were in the DP camps until the end of 46. And in 47, my parents had friends who went to Bolivia before the war. And when they found out that we were alive, they made papers for us. And so Bolivia was like a next home for us. We were able to live there for a while, but it was not a country that was good for us, And so we made arrangements to go to the States. And my father's landsman, who went to America before the war, made papers for us. And that's how we ended up in America.
Thank you to all three of you for sharing your story. I have a few questions that I would like you to, whoever would like to answer. And a few of you shared some of these answers in your introductions. And we're going to try and be brief so that we can get to some of the weightier questions and leave time for all of our participants on this call to ask questions as well. So my first question is about your hometowns, where you came from. What do you remember about your hometowns? Did you return? George spoke about that a little bit. Did you return? And have you reconnected with any family or friends that are from your hometown? Please.
Well, are you asking individually or?
I thought I would let whoever would like to answer the question, just go
Okay,
ahead and jump in, and then we'll move around.
I'll answer that question. I've returned many times to Budapest, and I can't say that I have reconnected, with the exception of one childhood friend who was also a Holocaust survivor. He stayed behind and has become a celebrity of sorts, actor, director, and producer of motion pictures and etc. Is very famous, more famous for his cabarets than anything else. He's also a comic, so he's kind of like a Woody Allen in his prime. So that's about the only thing that still remains. But the city itself is totally changed, and although every time I walk the streets of Budapest, it's like I'm seeing the ghosts of people I grew up with after the war. And it's very, very emotional whenever I'm over there.
Thank you. Gladys or George, would you like to answer?
Yeah, well, I'd like to say that I never went back to Poland again. And I may have been tempted to go, but my husband Irv did not want to step foot in Poland because he went through the same kind of life history. And but when we went to Bolivia, my father's best friend who had gone to Bolivia, and there were other paisanos, as I would call them, landsmen from the same town, had gone to Bolivia. And my parents were friends with my father's, this friend. They had a little girl the same age as I was, and we were little girls' friends. So my parents always talked about her. So when I finally reunited with her in Bolivia, it was such a high. It was like I've known her all my life, and she felt the same way. It was such a good feeling to be welcome to a place that, when you go from place to place, you are really not a very secure person.
Thank you. George, did you want to add anything? Oh, you're muted, George.
What I didn't share with you, we were able to meet when we went back, a cousin that survived, but whose parents were picked up on the first roundup of Jews. And he ended up living with the Catholic family to adulthood. And where Ziggy and I, by the grace of God, were able to get out, he never did. And it was a touching time to reunite with them.
Thank you. All three of you mentioned people that helped you and your families. What do you think motivated those people to help you?
I believe that they would do anything for the people that helped us, that we went to Bolivia. They were close friends and they were like family. So they were motivated. They had a society and they were saving money in case somebody needed to come so they can help them. And that's what happened to us. And I must say that everywhere we went, there were either landsmen or relatives like cousins or something. They were always willing to help if we needed it. They were kind and caring. And I suppose they felt guilty that they had a better life than we did. And here we had to struggle and suffer so much before getting there.
Thank you, Gladys. George or Steve?
Well, I'm going to show you a picture, which is this is the picture of the King of Sweden. And of course, my talk is abbreviated, but he was a very instrumental in motivating the Hungarians to see the light and wake up their humanity. So in a way, I have to allude to the King of Sweden, King Gustav, who basically gave the green light to the effort, the diplomatic effort that went into the saving of the remaining Jewish population, of which I was part of.
A story about Vyacheslav, the gentleman who saved me. He was an airplane pilot in an air force that only had 3 planes. And so he worked with the Polish underground. And throughout the time we were living with them, until they had to leave, he was very active in helping save other people in other ways, other than just us, other than me in that home. So he was a very remarkable man.
Thank you. How did your experiences inform decisions that you made throughout your lives? And how did it affect the relationships that you carried with you from your experiences and the ones that you formed with people you met after the war?
I was always haunted by the question of how do you repay someone who saved your life? It was the question that haunted me since learning of the Chervinskys. And here are 3 ways I chose to repay their incredible generosity. We invited the Chervinsky grandchildren to spend their senior year of high school in our home. And we have stayed close with that family and gone back 4 separate times to both their weddings and to honor them when they were given the award for the Righteous Gentile. I decided to increase my activity in a variety of leadership roles in my temple. And thirdly, I chose to volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club, where I've mentored high school kids for the past 18 years. One of our annual activities is telling the club kids my story before taking them to the Museum of Tolerance, exposing them to what happened during the war, teaching of the importance of tolerance, and not generalizing about the other.
I'd like to maybe segue on that. I am a frequent speaker at the Museum of Tolerance, where I speak to mainly the younger generation, high school, middle school, and I try to educate them as much as possible. And basically, it's almost become my life's work to acquaint memory, like mentioned earlier, the memories fade about the Holocaust, and especially the players in the Holocaust. And we're talking about the good players. I visited Sweden to pay homage to Raoul Wallenberg. I had a hard time finding anybody who's ever heard of him. This is something that I like to change. And that's usually is the thrust of my talks, to educate as many people as I can about what role the Swedish people have played in the saving of so many of the remaining Hungarian Jewish lives.
Well, I think that I have tried to be more, how do you say, caring. I don't think I tried, but I've been helping and working. I was at Temple Menorah as the sisterhood involved, and I was involved in the temple also board. And since my husband went to art school in Germany in the DP camps, I was very, very involved in art organization. And until a few years ago, we've been raising money and all that, and we still try, even though our chapters are not functioning, but we try to raise if we can. And it wasn't easy to go through life. I was many times, through many years,
Lost the audio.
Gladys, we lost your sound. Gladys, can you hear us?
yeah.
There, we lost your sound for a moment there. So if you could just repeat what you just said.
I said that I don't know if you lost it during the art, that I was very active in art.
Right after that.
Okay. Well, when you go through experiences, insecurities, not having a place long enough to be in a home, and so you have doubts. And I think that I went for help, and I felt that helped me become a better person and help others if I could. And it was a good thing to me. I always kept my friends for closeness. My close friends are here for many years, even since I was a teenager. So.
Thank you. Just a few more questions, then hopefully we'll have time for any questions from our participants. Do you think the world is better now?
Well, if you see it the way it is now, is it really better? The whole world is in chaos. And also, I think if we would turn our back, we would be having problems. We still do, anti-Semitism and all that. We have to be cautious all the time and be aware and not be afraid.
Unfortunately, it is worse today. Maybe it's not worse, but it's more on the surface. And today you can find it acceptable. And that's disheartening. And we have to work to help change that.
Genocide has become an everyday event. Every time I open the newspaper, there's a genocide happening somewhere. China with the Uyghurs, Rwanda, the Tiger region of Ethiopia. I mean, it just never ends. So if anything, I think the world has become emboldened by the Holocaust instead of having learned from it.
Which leads us to our last question. As people who survived the unthinkable, what is your message for especially young people today? Considering what you just shared with us, how can they, especially Jewish youth, how can they help?
All you got to look at what happened on January the 6th. What happened on that day is reminiscent of Kristallnacht in 1933, which signaled the emergence of Nazi Germany and Hitler. And it almost happened. And one of the unmistakable slogans or moods, or pervasive moods, was anti-Semitism of the crowd. You couldn't miss it, even if you were blind. There was a huge undercurrent of anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism is alive and well in the United States, I'm afraid to say.
I think what we need to do is, if you look at all the horrible things going on in the world, I think the way you offset that is about what you try to do as an individual to help in your own way to expose young people to tolerance and to not generalize about any group, and learn to communicate about the good that can come from a great communication. And I think that's the only way you can maintain your optimism, is by working with people who are like mind, and we work together to enlighten the young.
I also think that it's important for the young people to be aware what's going on, and be kind to each other, be kind to other people, and especially minority and people who are on the street, who have no place to be and have no food. It's a crime to see this in America. I hope the younger people are more cautious, and they're more aware, and they're more helpful to everyone.
Thank you very much to Steve and to George and to Gladys for sharing your stories and your thoughts with us. We have a few moments if anybody would like to share a question in the chat that our panelists can answer. While we're waiting for questions to pop in, if anyone has, I think you were very thorough. If any of you have any last thoughts you'd like to share before we conclude with any questions from the audience, and then with a few more songs. Oh, I see that Frank has a question. Go ahead, Frank. You can unmute and ask.
Yeah. I think this was fascinating, very interesting. I am not a survivor. I'm escapee, I call myself, because we got out of Vienna. My question is, how many of this group of 93, 94 are in the same situation, that we either escaped from, myself, Vienna, other people gave us their places and other places, and are here today? I'd like to see what the percentage is Can you ask the people to raise their hand or something?
Sure, if people could raise their hand, if you are an escapee, a survivor.
Do it. Tell them to push the participant and then raise their, and let's see, we can't do that. I gotta, how do you raise your hand?
It's in the reactions button, if people are comfortable doing that. And if not, you can also just wave your actual hand.
Okay, well, I'll let you run that. I'd like to know the answer to that.
Or I would say if you
This is
yourself
fun.
or your parents are survivors or escapees, that would be very interesting.
No, I want to know only those that are here today, because we're not young anymore. So I was born in 33, younger. I'm a little bit older than these people here, but I'm very blessed with being in America, and I tend to agree that we are in trouble today. Anyway, how many people, I would like to know that actually were in Europe and came here and are here today. Thank you.
See, I've seen 2 or 3 virtual hands come and a few actual hands as well. So there's definitely a smattering of people that escaped. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We had a question in the chat for Steve as to how you got to the United States.
Well, after the war, everything was nationalized, and my family was classified as bourgeoisie because of our pre-war wealth, which of course all disappeared during the war. So I had no opportunities to look forward to. As a student, I got as far as high school. My prospects of going to college were slim and nil, and the political situation and the repression were such that I couldn't take it any longer. During the after the Hungarian Revolution, in which I took some part, my father admonished me and told me that I could be in mortal danger if once the communists regained power. And so with a couple of friends of mine, I decided to leave the country at age 14. And I ended up in the United States by way of Munich and Vienna, actually. And I was by compliments of Hayes, who did the relocation. And first, I had an aunt in New York that didn't work out, only lasted about 4 weeks. And I was returned to the refugee camp, and eventually I connected with a family in Santa Monica, and I stayed with them for about a year and a half. But that's basically it. That's how I arrived in the United States.
Thank you. And thank you, Steve. The last question that we have is also, I think, for you. Why do you think that Raoul Wallenberg and the Swiss focused their attention on Budapest, but not the other Eastern European areas?
Well, the whole movement started, or the whole effort began around May, June of 1944. So there was very little time to save. And besides, most of the other Jewish populations were already in shambles, or they were hardly any left. I mean, I don't know, about 2/3. My impression was the number was greater than 2/3 of the Jewish population that was annihilated or at least moved from their existing places of where they were living, or they were displaced, I should say. So there was very little time. He came to Budapest on July 7th, and he left on February the 17th, and that's by then the war was over. So that's the reason. He came at the 11th hour, and it's amazing what he has done. You know, if you just stop and think about the logistics of housing all these people, feeding them, providing medical care, clothing them. I mean, it wasn't just setting up the safe houses, but everything that went with it. So that's it. I think that's the answer. There was no time. And unfortunately, it's too bad that maybe if some forces came along earlier, more people could have been saved. But that's a reality.
Thank you very much, Steve. And thank you to Steve and to Gladys and to George for sharing your stories and your thoughts with us, for your candor and for your message that there's still time to save what is going on in the world today. If we, of the generations that are on this call, and especially the young people, really put our minds to it, there are still things that we can do to keep from entering into that kind of a dark place again. So thank you very much. We are going to turn it over to Ilan for some closing songs.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. So I think that this closing song is so appropriate. And as we've discussed our concerns for our world today, I think it becomes even more important. These words come from Isaiah and speak to all of us about believing that we can make the difference, believing that we can bring about the Messianic era, that we can bring about this time. These words of Ani Ma'amin say, I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Mashiach, in the coming of a Messianic time, in the coming of wholeness back to our world, our broken world. And even though that time may be in the distance, even though the Mashiach may tarry, nonetheless, I will still wait for it. Well, I believe that we have to take one more step beyond waiting. We have to wait for it, and we have to work toward it, so that we can all come together in a world that is befitting Mashiach, in a world that is befitting this Messianic era. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shleima beviat HaMashiach. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema beviat HaMashiach. Ani ma'amin ve'af al pi שיתמהמה עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. אני מאמין, לי, 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 באמונה שלמה, לי, 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 אני מאמין, לי, 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 אני מאמין באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח. אני מאמין. I do believe that we can bring about a time that will be fitting of the Mashiach if we all work together and we all learn from these incredibly sage teachers of ours who have lived it and who have found their way through it and who have taught us how to repair it. Thank you.
Amen.
I
Thank
want to thank all of our partners. I think on this day that we recognize the common denominator of our Jewishness and the great blessing of how special it is that we come together as a South Bay Jewish community and commemorate this period together. So thank you to our friends at Temple Menorah and Temple Bethel for being a blessing in our lives.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. May we go from strength to strength, emboldened by these lessons. A meaningful day of reflection and recharge. Good night, everybody. Laila Tov.
Good night.
Thank you so much.